1877, I found myself in Fort Griffin Flats, Texas. It was a scrawny little town full of ruffians, men of all trades, walks of life. It was just outside the Fort Griffin, which I found rather ironic since I was born in Griffin, Georgia. It was there one evening that a ravishing redhead walked through the doors of the local saloon, whom I had met several years earlier in St. Louis, Missouri. Her name was Mary Catherine Corona. We never really got to talk much in Missouri, and figured this time we'd get reacquainted. One of the questions that she asked me was where I was from. Though I don't remember my words verbatim, it went something like this. I was born in a little town called Griffin, Georgia, in 1851. Growing up in Georgia was a wondrous experience for a young boy before the war between the states. Georgia was a beautiful place. Indeed, there were stately mansions with their tall, fluted columns on the portico. Many of them were lined by stately oaks, and inside those oaks were an airy plant called Spanish moss that dangled from their precarious limbs. Magnificent magnolia trees in Georgia created a wonderful sense of smell as you walked through them. There were many creeks that ran through our land, and in the cool shade along the banks of those little creeks, through the cool green leaves of mint, all you had to do was rub your hand through them to let them release their lovely fragrance. They also used them for a drink called mint julep. The forests were full of animals. Hunting was plentiful there in Georgia. Deer, rabbits, squirrel. I had a wonderful time growing up in northern Georgia. But when the war came, many things changed. Scott's Anaconda, as they called the northern blockade of the southern ports, was aptly named, for it helped squeeze the life out of our southern way of life. So we were proud people, proud of the way we lived. We lived with honor. Our word or handshake was as good as putting pen to paper. Things that we had been used to were now becoming very scarce. Things such as pen, ink, paper, shoes even. All kinds of commodities were now getting scarcer and scarcer as the war progressed. As a young man growing up there in Griffin, I had a wonderful time with my cousins, who were mainly more my friends, for I had been born with a defect that kept me from most of the general public. My mama was a sainted woman. She, in fact, became my best friend. I spent more time with her than probably anybody else on the face of the earth. My daddy, he was a heavy-handed, iron-willed man, and he and I clashed many times during my youth. Luckily, though, my daddy had had some foresight, for he had been in the Confederate Army, and he knew the Yankees were headed our way. He had been discharged for medical reasons, and when he returned home, he knew we should leave Griffin, for the Yankees were approaching Atlanta, which was a central railway place, and telegraph wires ran through that. He decided he would take us as far away from the Yankees' destruction as possible, move down south to the southern border of Georgia with Florida, in a little town called Bemis. Bemis was an ugly little town, sun-baked. Boards were all warped, paint peeling. It looked like it actually had been abandoned at one time. But nonetheless, he decided that's where we were going to live, out of his concern for our safety. In Bemis, life was completely different for me. So I had left everyone and everything I had known prior there in that little town of Griffin. Well, actually, it had been a bustling town. It was the biggest town between Atlanta and Meade, Georgia. All sorts of businesses had flourished there. My daddy had accumulated thousands of acres of land around that little town. He sold a bunch to raise cash. Of course, it was all Confederate dollars. Nonetheless, it allowed him to buy more land down in the southern part of our state. Incidentally, my daddy was instrumental in starting pecan groves down in that part of Georgia, which became a very good cash crop. Life, as I said, had changed dramatically for me, especially when my mama died. She had died of chronic pulmonary disease, which we call consumption. It had a devastating effect on me. Well, she and I, as I had mentioned, were the best of friends, and I have actually preferred her company over my daddy's company. It was common in those days for a man or a woman to mourn their loss for a year. They were to wear black for the first 9 months, gray for the last 3 months. Well, lo and behold, only after 3 months, my daddy remarried. That was the most disgusting thing I could think that he could do. To not show respect for my mama like that was just intolerable. And he and I were at odds for the rest of our lives. He married a woman, Rachel Martin, whose family had lived in Valdosta. And indeed, after their marriage, he moved us into a home sold to him by Rachel's father. One day, I went down to the local swimming hole. There were some darkies down there swimming. That was not allowed, even though they thought they had every right to be there. Well, I had an old pistol with me that my granddaddy actually had given me. An old 1851 Colt that I had used occasionally, but I carried it with me, for in those times it was rather dangerous to be out in the woods by yourself, where you never know who might be there with you. I fired a shot or two over the heads of those young boys. Of course, they scattered to the wind, and we proceeded to go swimming. Word got back somehow to my daddy that I had killed those young men. Well, that was not true. He did not believe I should take any chances to stick around, possibly pay the consequences for murder. He decided it would be best for me to go up to Atlanta, where my Uncle John had lived, well, actually still lived. It's also the new capital of Georgia. It's a flourishing town, and he figured I could get myself lost there very easily if need be. Luckily, my uncle took me in and let me stay there for as long as I cared to. Life by then was nothing that I had ever believed it would be for me. I never believed I'd actually move out of my hometown of Griffin. I believed I'd stay there for the rest of my days. I lost my mama, which I never thought I would have happen to me at that early age. See my daddy remarry, Yankees coming through, Sherman with his destruction all the way down to Savannah. Life was miserable. I became more rebellious. I cared less what my daddy had to tell me. I had nothing good to say to him either. People wonder why I became the way I am. Perhaps it's because of my young upbringing and the things that happened to me along the way. Well, excuse me. It was not long after. Turns out I contracted the same disease that killed my mama. Consumption. At that time, they figured rest, warm air would be good. Well, the air in Georgia is very humid in the summertime. Very heavy on the lungs to try to breathe, even if you had normal lungs. In consultation with my uncle, he decided that perhaps I should go out west. Well, when I returned, I talked with my daddy about it. He figured, well, that's probably a good thing, son. You should go. And for the first time in my life, I left my home state of Georgia and went to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Big, bustling town. Full of people. For Griffin, it was the largest town, as I said, between Atlanta and Macon. It could not hold a feather to the big town of Philadelphia. Well, that's what happened to me, Kate. Perhaps that's the way I am today. I do drink, that's for sure. It helps ease my pain. It not only eases the pain of my disease, it eases the pain of my mind. Having to think of all those things. And oh, by the way, the other thing that I left behind in Georgia was a woman I thought I was going to marry. My third cousin, Maddie. It was all right in those days to marry your cousin. She went into a convent, and I knew then I'd never see her again either. So while I had started my life as a happy child, I can't say that the rest of my days were as happy. I'd actually had planned on coming home to Georgia and starting a business with my cousin Robert, who also went to dental school. So far, that has not yet happened. I have not yet returned to Georgia. I still hope to do so one day, once my condition clears up. The doctors told me I had a short time, and so far I've lasted longer than they had said I would. Who knows how much time I have left? Who knows if I'll ever see Georgia again? Though our way of life was ruined by the Yankees, the war of aggression, I still had a glimmer and hope that perhaps life could be the way I had grown up. Well, man was a gentleman. He treated ladies with respect. He learned, as every Southern boy did, how to shoot and hunt. Even though I started my life as a doctor of dental surgery, unfortunately, along with my lungs, decayed the longer I stayed alive. Well, Kate, that's about it so far in a nutshell. What lays ahead, I have no idea where I'll wind up. But I hope I live long enough to get back home to the wonderful state of Georgia.